Everyone. Thanks again for joining our webinar series. This is Upmanu Lal at Columbia University in New York. We've been having this series on America's water now for several months and have had some interesting speakers. And today's it should be even more interesting than some of the ones we have had in the past. The series, as you know, is associated with our America's Water initiative and with our National Science Foundation project on America's water future. One of the key issues that we've been discussing in our initiative is the projections that to replace our existing urban water infrastructure might cost 1 trillion or more, according to different estimates. And the question that comes up in that regard is, well, how will this be financed? If you were to do replacement or if you were to do something more innovative, either way, the question is, how do you pay for it? And Christine Boyle, who has a PhD from North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and a bachelor's degree from Columbia, um, has been one of the people who has really come to the forefront of that particular analysis, working with water utilities and others, coming up with innovations on how to do things. She's also a serial entrepreneur, uh, currently the CEO of Valor Water Analytics, but she also, if I remember right, had something called Blue Water. I may be getting that wrong. It was Blue something earlier, and probably still has that company as well. So it's a real pleasure to have someone who is out in the trenches and getting significant recognition for their ideas on how the financing of existing water utilities and their restoration can come by. So with that, let me welcome Christine, and please type in your questions for her on in the chat window as we go through, and then we'll have a question at the end. Uh, so with that, let me turn it over to Christine.
All right. Thank you, Manu, very much. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes. Okay. Well, I appreciate it, and I just want to let the entire staff of Columbia Water Center and the other hosts know that this is much appreciated and much needed in this sector. So it's my pleasure to be here and to take this walk through the research I've been doing, as well as what I've been doing as an entrepreneur and the leader of a company, because it all is coming down to trying to fortify and strengthen America's water infrastructure, and we're attacking that problem from the sense of how to pay for it, as Manu mentioned. So with that, I'll spend the next, I don't know how, I haven't practiced this whole presentation, but I think we'll get to it in about 35 minutes and then have lots of time for questions. As Manu mentioned, I've taken an interesting route to get to where I am today. I have a foot both in the academic world. I'm a professor at Portland State University, as well as a serial entrepreneur. And I think it's interesting to see this interesting path that I've taken, because similar to my career, how we attack this problem of the water sector is also not straightforward. So I think it's instructive to see kind of a curvy path in terms of how I've gotten to help address the problem of paying for water infrastructure. Could be seen in both what I do, but also how I've gotten here. I worked in the technology field in New York City in the late 90s, went on, got kind of lost interest in that after a while, and decided to dedicate my career to water resource planning, which I did at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and was a researcher at the Environmental Finance Center at University of North Carolina for many years, and now actually spun off the technology that my team developed there, and now I'm running it as a company. So what I'm going to present to this group today is going to be a combination of the work I did at Environmental Finance Center and the work I did while I was at University of North Carolina, and then getting into some more of the current work that doing now. So we're going to kind of do a back and forth in terms of the types of information that I'll present to the group today. So $1 trillion, that's a huge number. And there's some different discussions around that number. $1 trillion is the number cited by the American Water Works Association Buried No Longer report. And that number, more specifically, is $1 trillion needed over the next 25 years to replace America's underground water systems. That's everything, obviously that refers to the buried, the pipes that are underground. So that is a number that does not include things such as the more innovative technologies like potable and non-potable water reuse, other kinds of water efficiency and water loss detection, things like desalination that's becoming more popular in California, things along those lines. So
looking
with
for
the current
information about building permits? Call Planning and Development at 678-518-6000.
Is it?
Are you new to Gwinnett County and need to start your trash and recycling service? Visit sustainablegwinnett.com to find your hauler and get information about the county's solid waste plan.
Oops. Is everyone else hearing this weird noise?
Do you need to obtain a marriage, birth, or death certificate? Check out GwinnettCourts.com to learn how to obtain these documents. Find property tax and car tag information at GwinnettTaxCommissioner.com.
This is weird. I wonder what's going on.
Calling Gwinnett County Government. Please remain on the line. Someone will be with you shortly.
It's like someone has...
Looking for information about courts? Visit GwinnettCourts.com.
Someone needs to mute their phone. I'm not sure who it is.
Yeah.
The Gwinnett Justice and Administration Center is located at 75 Langley Drive in Lawrenceville. This is where you will find the Gwinnett County Board of Commissioners, Superior, State, Probate, and Magistrate Courts, District Attorney, Tax Commissioner, the Transportation and Community Services Departments, along with Human Resources and other support departments. Need to reach Water Resources Customer Service? Contact them at 678-376-6800. Looking for tax information? Go to GwinnettTaxCommissioner.com to find information on ad valorem taxes, property taxes, and homestead exemptions. Get all the latest county news delivered straight to your inbox by signing up for email newsletters at GwinnettCounty.com. View live traffic footage and plan your commute ahead of time at GCSmartCommute.com.
It's pretty clear. It's coming from the area code 678 number. Oh, good. She's muted everyone now.
All guests have been muted. You can unmute your line by pressing *6.
Okay. Can people hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Let's just keep on going, everyone. So that's with Gwinnett County advertising and back to water infrastructure. Thanks, everyone, for your patience. That was interesting. I think we got phone bombed. All right. So I want to make a couple of points on this slide, and then we'll get onto it. I think a lot of people on the phone and a lot of people have a lot of familiarity with the energy sector. And what's interesting about the water sector that's different, one thing is that, some acute observers have noted that the water sector in terms of innovation and both on finance and technology, analytics, all of the above, really resemble where the energy sector was, say, 15 years ago. But you'll see from this slide, the reason I put this in is that the key difference is fragmentation. 52,000 water utilities in the United States, and 93% of those systems serve under 10,000 people. And these are with the average system age of underground pipes being greater than 50 years old. So when we think about how we're going to address this problem and how we're going to solve this problem, we've got old technology, we've got a highly fragmented water sector, which is based on the local realities of how water is sourced and distributed. So, this is beginning to paint a picture of some of the challenges that we do face in terms of financing water infrastructure. So given this fact, what we do know, and what the reports by the American Society of Civil Engineers, the American Water Works Association, the wonderful reporting that's been done by Circle of Blue and the Columbia Water Center too, is that the costs of not paying attention and addressing this situation are tremendous. Our aging system leaks 1.7 trillion gallons of water per year, and that price tag alone has been estimated at just shy of $3 billion in water loss alone. These are often from aging and poorly maintained pipes that are difficult to track the leaks and also very expensive to replace. I've heard estimates that replacing a mile of pipe in a major city costs around $1 million a mile. And we know that that's an expensive problem. So the question for our water providers is, given that there's an estimated 240,000 water main breaks a year, do you just do kind of a patchwork approach to dealing with problems as they occur, or do you just go in and begin to replace? So let's take a step back. So that's a kind of a bare bones description of where we are in terms of the state of our infrastructure. So how did we get here? First thing to note is that the majority of America's water infrastructure was built in the early and mid-20th century. Huge federal investments from Roosevelt's New Deal and then the post-World War II construction boom led to the building of what's arguably one of the finest, or has been, or could have been at some moment, one of the world's finest water systems. America is among the leaders of providing some of the cleanest and most affordable water to the widest swath of population, given the size of the country. Another step was in 1972 towards really cleaning up our act with the passing of the Clean Water Act, which really raised the bar in terms of the water quality laws that were passed across the land. And so this was excellent in terms of ensuring safe drinking water, but also called for a whole new influx of investment because the new EPA laws and mandates put a higher water quality standards across the nation, which led to the building, a massive building boom for wastewater treatment, and as well as some different types of stormwater treatment facilities. And we'll get more into this a little bit about what we mean about these different kinds of systems and how much they cost as we continue the conversation. So where we are now, however, is what we see that where there was a boom, and apologies for the murky slide here, but we saw a boom in water infrastructure investment in the, like I said, the mid 20th century, and it's tailored off. And I can show you a little bit more in terms of what that means in terms of local spending and also in federal spending. Since the creation of the main federal funding source, which is the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund, that was created in 1996. And what we've seen with the state SRF is that there's been kind of a steady decline in the amount of money that's being dispersed by the federal government via the states since 1996. Now, you can see from this graph there was an uptick in 2010 and 2011, and we know that that was the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act passed by Obama. So we saw this kind of spike in federal spending on infrastructure, but in general, the trend in the last 10 years has been decreasing investment into water infrastructure from the federal government and a general decrease in investment throughout the nation in terms of both replacement and creation of new infrastructure across our water and wastewater utilities. So taking a third crack at how we got here, what we see in the United States of America is that we have some of the cheapest water in the world, and that the water pricing principles are often based on marginal cost principles and typically only designed to cover the operation and maintenance costs for any given utility. I'm going to show you a little bit about some of the findings that we've seen based on a survey done at the University of North Carolina. So we asked 263 water utilities, do you think your water utilities rates and fees are enough to cover daily operations and expenses? Yes. So that's good, right? Daily operations and expenses are a small but important portion of our water utilities annual budgets, and includes things such as staffing, chemicals, a lot of electricity costs for pumping and treating water. In some places it covers parts of the actual supply. But as we continue to probe, and I'm going to show you more results of this survey as we go on, is we're asking, can you also pay for capital expenses? So that means not relying on external funding and not deferring your repayment of capital expenses. And we see kind of a more troubling finding here is that half of the utilities that we spoke with replied that no, they did not have enough cash on hand to cover those expenses. 57% said that they had enough to cover a portion of that. But this is kind of pointing to a vulnerable financial predicament where utilities are only doing their financial planning in order to cover their basic operating expenses and not necessarily planning for the future. So as an example, we'll take a closer look here at Raleigh, North Carolina. They have a very progressive water board as well as a progressive leader named John Carmen. Their water infrastructure assessment was that they would need $7 billion in repairs over the next 25 years. $500 million worth of pipes that was installed before World War II. And the pipes have a 60 to 100 year lifespan. Let's say safely that 60 years is a safer lifespan for a pipe that's providing water to our communities. But what we get to here, what John Carmen pointed out, was that this along with the previous slide is pointing to a fundamental business model problem. Is that the water bill is only covering the cost of treating and pumping, and it's not sufficient in terms of a financial model to pay for reinvestment. Adding to this predicament, and the predicament of water utilities, and something my business spends a lot of time about, is that in Raleigh, North Carolina, from Raleigh, North Carolina, all the way to New York City, Raleigh, all the way across the country to where I am based now in San Francisco, is that people are using less water, and water utilities thus are selling less water. So the financial predicament that utilities are facing is compounded by the fact that they're simply selling less water. So we have this multiple threads of a broken business model where the pricing isn't right. The commodity that they're selling is declining or the amount of the commodity they're selling is declining, and they have this cost structure with in this need for large capital investments that's leading them to need to really strengthen and fortify their business models, and yet they don't have a lot of the technical tools or know-how to do this. So as the last piece of how we got here, we also have this idea of the PR problem around this. I mean, we all know in our local papers, when we read the news, people get very upset and don't understand why they're being asked to use less and pay more per gallon of water. It's a problem that we see from coast to coast, and that causes the political, kind of like pokes at the political problems of the elected officials who are often in charge of dealing with rates. Across America, most of the water utilities are public and are governed by local politicians, local officials who are elected on town councils, city councils, water boards. They're the ones that are in charge of raising the rates, and it's very politically unpopular to raise rates, especially when folks are being asked to conserve water. So, why it matters. I can surmise that everyone on this call will have a good idea of why it matters, but let's go through some things specifically. For those, I don't know how many folks are in California, but for those of us in California know that water scarcity is growing. And this is really sounding alarms across the arid West as to the need to really change California's entire water use management system, the need for massive investments into advanced water technology, and that the situation in California shows no sign of letting up. Even if there's an El Nino this year, that will be a blip in terms of what is needed to actually have a long-term water sustainable West. And the impacts are being felt throughout the state, especially in farming communities, fisheries, and the threat to salmon, as well as the economic impacts of decreased hydro capacity. So why else this matters is that financially strained water agencies are bad for everyone. If you can look at this and look at this question from a lot of different angles. One angle is through the bond market. We know that the rating agencies such as Standard & Poor's, Fitch, Moody's are looking very closely at what has throughout the last century been a very low risk investment in bonds is muni bonds. Those days in California are now over, as water bonds and the credit rating agencies looking at bonds are now looking very closely at how drought is affecting the water utilities' ability to repay. And this indeed is, since water bonds remain one of the the most common forms of financing, as we see water utilities credit ratings go down. There was a higher rate of downgrades in 2012, 2013 amongst water utilities than ever before in history. And we see this as being a real threat to water utilities' ability to borrow money, water utilities' ability to reinvest into this much needed infrastructure. And as a kind of another detail, detail in this is that in the past we've seen that the federal government would be very generous with funds, but more and more as the federal funds have decreased, water utilities are much more on their own in terms of securing their own financing, coming up with their capital investment plans, their CIPs, and being the ones that are really at the forefront of having the sound financial performance in order to manage their long-term capital investment and planning. And what we see with these downgrades that are chronicled here from the Wall Street Journal, and I'll show you a little bit more detail on, is that water utilities are filling this drain. In California, many of the utilities that I work with, I'm actually here in Palm Springs at the Association of California Water Agencies fall meeting right now, and believe me, the major topic of discussion here is the financial impacts and the revenue impacts of the drought and how these utilities are going to stay financially solvent as they're selling so much less water. So going from California, I don't want to, I spent a lot of time thinking about California, but I also want to show you that this is not just a California problem. If you are familiar at all or follow what's going on in the Great Lakes region, we also see here that there are some real financial difficulties happening in the Great Lakes region, not so much on the water scarcity side, but on the water quality side. The EPA in the last 2 years issued a consent decree against the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District that required that district that covers the greater Cleveland area to spend $3 billion to address the water quality issues that are polluting the lakes there. So $3 billion bill for a community that has some of the most poor demographics in our country. You know, this is a very problematic. My company, we're actually helping work on a number of issues to help address the affordability issues in the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District. But this is again like kind of a head scratcher. Like, what providing a clean water is very expensive, and what if you have a rate base that simply does not have the ability to pay to help cover that $3 billion bill? We also saw a recent water crisis in Flint that again showed us both the importance of water as a public health resource and how expensive it can be when things go wrong. Everyone could Google. If you don't know about what happened in Flint in the last 2 months, it's worth a Google. This, again, sorry for the scratchy slide, but when we're talking about the cost of clean water, it is expensive. This doesn't really get into the cost of water quality, but it is going to show you this breakdown in terms of, on the water scarcity side, what it is costing per acre foot in terms of investment into new water sources. The top brass in California, the State Water Resource Control Board, the governor, the Department of Water Resources, the folks that I'm down here in Palm Springs with, believe me, there is nothing on this list that is not on the table right now in terms of investing into to fortify the state of California's water systems. The question is, who's going to pay for it? Which of these investments and what is going to be the menu of solutions that it's going to make sense for communities, and how are we going to pay for it? So, as we're taking this accelerated kind of tour of the financial management landscape, I wanted to kind of go a little bit deeper. That's sort of the big picture of how we got here and some of the problems, but a little bit deeper into the water utility so we can actually understand some of the things happening on the ground and understanding the predicament, and then we'll of course spend some time on how we solve these issues. So how water utilities today are paying for capital infrastructure. This is the same survey of 258 water utilities across the country when we asked them, how is your utility going to pay for infrastructure improvements? So we see here that 20% of utilities don't know, don't have much set aside for capital funds. 30% talked about that they would put capital aside when they have a surplus. That they are aware of the need for future capital investments, but they have what might be called like their rainy day fund when they have a surplus. This is very problematic because we know when we go back to talking about water sales across the country are declining, the days of surplus for water agencies are, as far as I can tell, all but gone. I've run into very few agencies that have sound surpluses that they're not digging into even today. So we have 21% that do have a capital reserve fund, and another 20% that have some sort of set-aside provisions for capital improvements. But this isn't the rosiest of pictures when we think about how capital plans are being set across the country. Give me a second. I'm on my phone, so that's good, but I need to reset my connection to the screen. Oops. And Manu or Lisa, can you reset me to the presenter? Thanks.
I lost Lisa too.
Thanks, guys. And I'm going to mute myself too.
Presenter.
So again, kind of going into the questions of the utility's ability to fund capital improvements, not looking great. And this points to one of the things I'll talk about is the need for not just funding from the federal government or the state governments, but also technical assistance. There's a huge reliance on financial consultants, and I think that is an important role. But there needs to be more. The financial consultants have not, in my opinion, placed their clients in very sound financial shape. And there needs to be much more in terms of technical assistance and I would argue oversight in order to build the technical capacity of our water utilities to meet the financial needs of the future. And what that means is having the political will to raise rates and having the financial expertise to understand how to finance water infrastructure into the future. So going a little bit more into a couple of questions, the survey, with what degree of confidence can you predict funds you will need for capital improvements? Well, this is over the next 1 year, 3 year, 5 years. Confident over 1 year, okay, that's good. 3 years, fairly confident. 5 years, fairly confident, but not confident at all when we're talking about 10 and 20 years. And we know that the bill for our, the replacement cycle for our pipes and our need for infrastructure is done on 10 and 20 year cycles. So this doesn't bode particularly well. Another way to look at it is I did kind of a deep dive into how water utilities are paying for capital investments if they're not doing pay-as-you-go. And you can see here that there is a large reliance on revenue bonds, and those are coming into the form of muni bonds. Those go through Wall Street markets. Capital is cheap right now, so that's good. But as we understand that water utilities' financial predicaments are getting worse because of drought and other reasons, and their credit ratings are going down, we need to have a more diverse portfolio in terms of how water utilities, the choices they have in terms of paying for that capital infrastructure. You see here there's state loan programs is only 9%, and that's that federal money I was talking about. It would be great to see that number much higher because often those comes with technical assistance that is much needed and the oversight that's needed in order to actually make those sound capital planning decisions. We also see some emerging finance models, and I think this is really interesting, and I would love, I'll talk to the Columbia Water Center. We're working on a paper that Dr. Lal has initiated around really investigating some of these things. We have pay-as-you-go. We've also seen that there's the emergence of the use of commercial paper in Truckee Meadows is in Reno, Nevada. We've also seen this in Contra Costa Water District, Las Vegas Valley Water District. They're doing these short-term commercial paper deals where they can get very low interest rates. Takes some quite a bit of financial savvy, but it's a good model. Public-private partnerships, such as we saw down in San Diego with the Carlsbad D-cell plant, very interesting. There's also an emerging model around performance-based financing where the private lender will take a margin off the top if they're in this performance-based contracts. such as for wastewater treatment plants, different kinds of desal plants, water efficiency type of operations. And there is a hunger on the part of private players to get involved in America's debt financing for water. But the models and kind of the testing that's needed to prove those out is really in its infancy, and that's something that I'm very, very pleased to be working on with the Columbia Water Center. There's clearly a need for greater innovation and capital in the water space, and there's a bubbling amount of action in that space, but not near enough. I'm going to talk a little bit about one thing we're doing at Valor Water that is kind of plays at the margins of water financing, but is important. We are very focused on helping water utilities collect non-revenue water. So non-revenue water is water that's actually going through the pipes but not being collected. Everything from water theft to meter under registration to system errors. This is a class of losses called apparent water losses. And we estimate that if we're able to do this across the country, that we will be able to help water utilities recoup almost $9 billion in revenue that they're for water they're selling but not collecting for. We call it our hidden revenue locator, and we're able to locate hidden revenue on 2.3% of meters, and that translates into actual top-line revenue. As an example of some of the money that we found $4 million in one agency. The lowest we found was $262,000. Oh no, here's the lowest, utility 4, $225,000. But this is real money that they should be collecting. It kind of points for the need there are a lot of efficiency opportunities that water utilities need some help and tools in order to help them collect those losses. As a last feather in the cap here in terms of innovation and what's going on deep inside the utilities is rates, how we charge for water. There are two things going on that I wanted to point to. One, well, never mind. I say two. Okay, I'll make it three. One, the price of water needs to go up. And the credit rating agencies are using their credit rating mechanism to help force the arm of water utilities to make those rate increases. Of course, we need to protect low-income communities. There's a problem of governance in that since it's a political decision in local communities, it's been a very tough pill to swallow for local community leaders to raise rates to the point that they need to in order to invest. But it's happening, albeit slowly. There are some innovative rate models in development, and that's something we did a lot of work on at the Environmental Finance Center. Some of those innovative rate models include budget-based rates, currently in 9 utilities in California, but growing at a swift pace. We also there's an innovative rate model called peak set base that's being used in a few places across the country. And we can certainly talk about that more if we're interested in talking about these different rates. And third is inclining block rates, which are probably what most of the people on this call pay. This is where, let's say you use 5,000 gallons, you have one rate, and as soon as you use 6,000 gallons, your price per unit goes up. So it's going to send you a conservation signal. As a last point on this, what we're moving to as a country is this idea in rate models in water utilities, and these are being embraced by great leaders in the water sector, such as George Hawkins at DC Water, is really changing the PR and how we communicate with our customers about rates. Instead of being a commodity where you just are like, well, I only use 5,000 gallons, I should only pay for 5,000 gallons. There's a shift happening in terms of how we think about water, in terms of a readiness to serve mentality. And George Hawkins talked about this. I talk about it all the time. The fact that you can turn your bathtub on at 3 in the morning and gush that water out, and take, 5 baths. That is what you're paying for. You're paying for your ability and that readiness for the utility to serve you water. And what that translates into in the rate structure is that you're going to pay a larger fixed meter charge on a monthly basis because you're paying for that ability that even if you don't use it, you have the ability to turn on that spigot and run that water, and therefore on a monthly basis you're going to be asked to pay a larger fixed portion of your bill that reflects the utility's readiness to serve you at any moment. Okay. So, wrapping it all up is this question: will this get us to the $1 trillion mark? And I think that across both the technology, the engineering, the governance, as well, the regulators, I should say, whether it be the Senate or the state local boards, across the sector, we could say with a fair amount of confidence is the answer right now is not likely. And that's of great concern. And so we need to keep trying harder. The 1 trillion mark is still short. We're still short of that, and we can see that because there isn't a boom in water infrastructure investment right now, and it's greatly needed. I am seeing kind of a tipping point towards greater action on the part of both water utility leaders and state regulators and funders to begin to lead us towards making these investments, but we're not quite there. And it's going to take the great work of both technical assistance, thought leadership, regulatory pressures, all of the above, to get us closer to that mark. I think we're making good strides, but there's still a road ahead of us. It's going to take a lot of work to get our country's water infrastructure to where it needs to be. So I don't want to. I am an optimist. I am confident we could do it. With the abilities we have in our country, have been able to take on great infrastructure feats. But unfortunately, there's just not enough focus on water and on helping local communities that there needs to be for the moment. So that's the end of my remarks, and happy to take questions if people want to begin typing them in. Okay. Rosario has a question. Is it less expensive creating new cities with innovative and sustainable water infrastructure than I would say than fixing old cities? Good question. I think the answer to that is probably yes. It is less expensive. But water infrastructure, of course, is just one piece of that pie. You've got questions about land use. So two things. We could think of Las Vegas and what happened there when they went through their big boom in the 2005 to 2008. Yeah, they were able to charge developers at a rate that reflected the cost of providing that water. That also they were able to, they're just going to dig up the roads once, lay the pipe instead of having to do all the retrofitting and such. So certainly in the technology innovations that you're able to put in terms of the latest wastewater technologies, reuse, all those things, I think it is cheaper to build than to retrofit. But of course, there's a lot of other considerations when we think about, building new cities. But yeah, great question. Question from Michelle. My question is regarding readiness to serve concept. How do you think the pricing structure would impact low-income households where the cost of utilities make up a large portion of the household income? Great question, Michelle. And I think it's interesting to use D.C. as an example. So D.C., Washington, D.C., just this fall announced very steep increases in, we could use the same word. We call it a meter charge, the fixed rate, the readiness to serve charge. And we know that Washington, D.C. has, highly vulnerable low-income segments. So it's something that is thought about a lot there. There are a couple of things you can do in order to help protect the low-income two of those things are you can include a minimum amount of water in that first block that includes your readiness to serve charge. So let's say you could include like 5,000 gallons within that fixed block charge of that readiness to serve. That's one thing you can do so that to make sure that for those folks that are on fixed incomes, that they're going to get a minimum amount of water that they need in order to live and take care of their families and protect and really kind of try and protect them from that increased charge. Another thing is that I think in places like Cleveland and DC, when we're going to see these large bills, it really means that you need to have more frontline community assistance and outreach programs. You need to get much more aggressive on having those portions of money, those stock pots of money that are available in order to target them for customer assistance. Because we know that what happens if you don't pay your bill? Well, it's terrible. You get your water cut off. If you don't pay your bill, you don't have water. And we've seen this in Baltimore and Detroit and other places. This is a PR nightmare. It's been pointed to as a threat to your human rights. So I think those combination of kind of a savvy rate structure that has some kind of minimum apportionment in that readiness to serve charge, but also getting ready to have much more active frontline customer assistance programming to help folks that are vulnerable populations avoid the very worst scenario, which is getting your water cut off. So Lacus has a question. Electrical utilities have moved towards decoupling of rates to incentivize efficiency. Is there anything analogous going on with water utilities? And the answer to that is yes, kind of. So two things are going on around decoupling. Well, let's see. I could frame this is one thing that you have to understand about the difference between electrical and water utilities is that the majority of electrical utilities are private and governed by the Public Utilities Commissions at the state level, and the majority of water utilities are public. So there's a difference in governance there. And so with that being said, I can say that for the public water utilities, this idea of this increased readiness to serve charge does function as a de facto decoupling at the customer level. It means that no matter how much water you use on a monthly basis, if you use 10 gallons or if you used 10,000 gallons, that you're going to face a fixed charge of, let's say, $40. And that way, it is kind of an implicit de facto decoupling method. But what we're really talking about on decoupling in the electricity side is decoupling, as I understand it, is really based on the revenue structure of the utility companies, where the utility companies are incentivized to be efficient because no matter how much less electricity they use, they're guaranteed a stream of fixed revenue. And for the water utilities in California, which are the ones I'm tracking the most carefully right now, the private water utilities have a very similar mechanism built into their structure that is, in fact, a decoupling mechanism. But you can only really have decoupling in that way with private water utilities, and private water utilities make up a fairly small portion of our nation's water utilities. So those are the two questions, and I think decoupling at the customer level, we can think about the increase in fixed rates, and then at the utility level, there is decoupling going on, and there's a lot of discussion going on about it at the California Public Utilities Commission. So I hope that, yeah. But I think it's something really worth exploring, and it's certainly on the table when we think about how to charge for water and also how to incentivize both public and private utilities to remain committed to their job, which is providing communities clean and affordable water. Maura has a question. It's interesting to learn that the vast majority of systems serve small communities. What would be the relative cost of restoring pipe systems in these areas versus installing private groundwater wells? Good question. So our nation's small water systems are the ones that are in the biggest trouble. If you look at what the EPA is doing, if you look anywhere across the regulators of our nation's water, the EPA, the State Water Resource Control Board, the Department of Water Resources, the vast majority of their efforts and their dollars are going towards helping small water systems. The small water systems are the most mismanaged, have the worst financial predicaments, and are so vast, and the threats and when you're asking about pipe systems versus private groundwater wells, I think the question that we're finding in California is a lot of it comes down to ensuring the public health aspect of the quality of water. There is legislation going on across the country to detect arsenic, to detect chromium-6, and all these other contaminants in water. And we're asking about turning over private water wells. The question really still comes down to protecting public health and making sure, even if we're on water wells, it still means that if there's groundwater available, that it's monitored and regulated so that it's done in a fair way. But also the cost there, a lot of it comes down to the water quality testing. That's very expensive and very, very important. But I think the question of helping small water systems across the country continue into the future is a big question mark. There's a lot of talk now in this realm about consolidating small systems to achieve greater economies of scale, and it takes up a huge amount of resources thinking about how to help our nation's small water systems deliver clean and affordable water, because those are the ones that are in under the greatest threat right now in terms of their aging workforce, the quality of their systems, their ability to do the proper testing to ensure public health, all of the above. It's a huge concern. Another question, Rosario asks, are water utilities providing rainwater harvested water? Let's see. That's kind of, it's a good question. I'm trying to think about how to answer that one. So rainwater harvested water, like you can think of water barrels. What we do see a lot is rainwater capture in terms of groundwater recharge and things along those lines. For basins like the LA basin where there's a huge problem around stormwater, what I've seen in terms of rainwater harvesting is that right now the economics around rainwater harvesting are a lot stronger for as a stormwater management practice than as a water supply practice. So you'll see in places like LA, across Texas, San Antonio, Dallas, that there is a lot of action going into rainwater harvesting, and a lot of that really is on the stormwater side and much less as becoming a part of the water supply portfolio. But yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think that's something that, of course, all the gardeners in the room would love should of course get a rain barrel and use that, especially for gardening. Great questions, everyone. This has been really fun for me. It's a little strange that I'm the only one talking and everyone else is typing questions. So I will put up my contact info so that if you ever do want to get in touch with me, you're welcome to send me an email. Okay, Professor Lahl, do you see in the 20-year time frame a shift to decentralized system with the utility as a service provider? What we talked about a lot, I've been a part of a lot of conversations along those lines in California, and the answer is yes. in large managed systems, if we look and see what happened in Australia, which is what the California water leaders are keeping a close eye on, is what we really see is this, what is known as district level water management. And I think district level water management points to your point, Professor Lal, around a decentralized system where you have the pressure zones, the water infrastructure are not done at a fully decentralized like household level, but at least on a district level where the systems are controlled and managed at these sub-utility levels. And that is a very viable system we've seen be successful in Australia, and is certainly one that the regulators and the water leaders of Los Angeles are taking very seriously and looking to see what that might look like for some of these basins and water utilities that have just become like almost unwieldy in how large they are, and the risk factors associated with system failure at a wide scale. More decentralized than that, though, I think that things get very expensive, and all my friends in the water quality and public health side of things that really pay a lot of attention to water quality, they get very nervous when we start thinking about leaving those water quality and supply testing measures up to non-professional staff.
Thanks very much, Christine. That was very nice. And I'm in San Francisco from the 12th through the 18th. So I don't know if you'll be around then or not. And if others, quite a few of the people on this call might be in San Francisco for AGU. So maybe if people are interested, they could contact you and set up a time to meet. I guess doesn't show a meeting.
All guests have been unmuted.
Okay, can people hear now? Maybe. Okay, thanks very much, Emily. I was just saying that the AGU is in 2 weeks in San Francisco, and Christine is based in San Francisco. So if several people are going there, and Christine is available, it might be a good time to meet her. I plan to do that. Thanks very much again, Christine. I don't think they can hear.